All right, Shalom. First and foremost, call Halal Yamla, Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem Harakak Wadash. Double honor to the apostles, the bishops, and the elders of Great Millstone, from whom I learned the truth from. And also peace and salutation to the hopeful elect of the nation of Israel, scattered throughout the four corners of the earth. And pretty much in this video, I wanted to do a video on news that's been floating about recently. Okay, about Russia possibly sending hypersonic missiles to Venezuela. All right, and I saw an article earlier today of that news going about. Russia sending hypersonic missiles to Venezuela. All right, in response to pretty much aggression from the United States, Babylon the Great. Okay, pretty much waging war against Venezuela. All right, and as you can see, I have here on the screen. It's from Google. As you see, I typed in Russia threatens to send hypersonic missiles to Venezuela. All right, and this is the AI overview. It says a Russian official has threatened the possibility of sending hypersonic missiles to Venezuela. Okay, and pretty much when you look up, all right, the power of hypersonic missiles, all right, when you pretty much do your research on the travel speed of hypersonic missiles, I believe they can travel from 5 to 7 times the speed of light. If I'm not mistaken, 5 to 7 Mach speed. Okay, but pretty much when you look at, or rather when you look up, okay, hypersonic missiles, okay, they're far more powerful and far more faster than the your standard ICBM nuclear missile. Okay, very very powerful missiles. Okay, that countries such as Russia and China as well, which also has hypersonic missiles. Okay, this is all a part of the Lord's armory that the Lord has opened up, to these particular nations that are at odds against Babylon the Great America. Okay, to be used as weapons to ultimately destroy America, Babylon the Great. Okay, to bring forth ultimately the wrath of Yahweh Shema Shai on this place. Okay, but it says a Russian official has threatened the possibility of sending hypersonic missiles to Venezuela, indicating that the U.S. may be in for some surprises. This comes amid escalating tensions between the United States and Venezuela and an increase in U.S. military presence in the Caribbean. Yeah, because, as we've been seeing over these past few weeks, as, Trump in the United States military has pretty much declared war against Venezuela, all over the guise of drugs, stopping drugs from Venezuela from entering to the country. Okay, and we've been seeing over these past few weeks where the U.S. military under this current Trump administration has been indiscriminately bombing particular boats and particular ships. Okay, all under the guise of these certain boats and ships were carrying drugs. Okay, trying to bring drugs into the United States. But meanwhile, there's no actual proof that those ships were actually carrying any drugs, period. Okay, or who was on those ships or what was on those particular ships. Okay, but pretty much the U.S. has been indiscriminately bombing ships that they accuse, okay, are coming from Venezuela, okay, through the Caribbean to enter into the United States. Okay, all under the guise of these ships were carrying drugs, and we need to stop drugs from entering into the United States from Venezuela, and this and the third. Okay, but what we've been seeing, under this Trump administration, okay, how the U.S. has been waging war as of lately against Venezuela under this Trump administration, is just another sign amongst many signs, all right, in 2025 of Esau Edom's bloodthirsty appetite. Okay, the appetite to constantly wage war. All right, come down with the sword. deal violently, all right, while using false narratives and false pretexts, okay, to justify Esau's bloodthirsty appetite, all right, and as the scripture speaks about, Salakia, as the scripture speaks about in the book of Habakkuk, Salakia, in the book of Habakkuk, chapter 2 and verse 4, it says, "Behold, his soul which is lifted up is not upright in him." Okay, talking about Esau, Edom. Esau, Edom's soul is lifted up in him. All right, but it's not upright. He's his pride has deceived him at an all-time high. Right. Esau is getting ready to come down with great wrath. Okay, to set up his NWO agenda and pretty much get rid of any opposition against his NWO agenda. Attack free speech, attack certain groups that have certain messages. Labeling people that speak out against his NWO agenda as, terrorists and Antifa, anti-Sim. Okay, and that's why it says at the latter part of this verse, "But the just shall live by his faith." Okay, because the stuff that Esau Edom is getting ready to come with in these latter days, as he knows that he's been exposed, he's been made bare. It's a shameful spewing all over his glory. Okay, he knows he's being cast down by this word going out, this gospel, this truth. All right, he's at a point where now he's pretty much getting ready to wage war. And he's looking for any and every reason to justify him, waging war. Okay, especially against those that have a message or a talking point against this NWO agenda, and especially against us, the hopeful elect, all right, the prophets of Yahweh Shema Shai. Okay, starting with the apostles and the bishops and the elders of Great Millstone, down to the least of us that are of the hopeful elect. We know Esau especially is getting ready to wage war against us and the message that we preach according to the Holy Scriptures. All right. So as I said, because Esau's soul is lifted up in him at an all-time high, and he he's not upright. Okay, and we, the hopeful elect, the just, are going to have to live on some serious faith towards Yahweh Shema Shai. All right. It says, verse 5, "Yea, also because he transgresses by wine." All right. Esau's philosophies, his doctrines, his policies. It says he is a proud man. All right. "Neither keepeth at home." See that? Neither keepeth at home. Esau is constantly always going, around the four corners of the earth, waging war, bombing, destroying, all right, overthrowing governments, okay, shedding blood, all right. That's how Esau gets down, and that's how he's always got down. Even going all the way back to the time of the Greeks, the ancient Greeks, and then the ancient Romans. Okay, when Esau was in power during the time of the ancient Greeks as well as the ancient Romans. All right, Esau was also always constantly going throughout the earth. All right, the known world at that time, the Eastern world. All right, conquering, invading lands. Okay, putting nations subject under its dominion and its authority. Okay, forcing these nations to pay taxes and tribute to his kingdoms. All right, bow down and worship his gods and his idols. All right, Esau Edom never stays at home. He's always wiggling around the earth. All right, waging war. Okay, and stealing resources. It says, "Who enlargeth his desire as hell." All right, destruction as well as captivity. That's what that word hell goes into in this verse right here. "Who enlargeth his desire as hell," destruction, captivity. All right, and it says, "and is as death." Okay, Esau's as death. Everywhere Esau goes, anytime Esau ever comes into power into the earth, all right, all you see is nothing but death flourishing throughout the earth. Okay, death, war, bloodshed, confusion, division. All right, conquering, pillaging, exploitation. Right. It says, "and cannot be satisfied, but gathereth unto him all nations, and heapeth unto him all people. Okay, and that speaks to Esau's NWO agenda. Okay, where he wants to pretty much, he has an end goal to pretty much gather all humanity under his power, under his control, and enslave all humanity through a digital system. Okay, and ultimately what? The MOTB, the microchip. Okay, enslave all humanity, all right, with the MOTB, the microchip, and bring all humanity under one, global digital system, the NWO system, governed by AI and technocrats, all right, to pretty much establish Satan's kingdom of heaven on earth, a left hand version of the kingdom of heaven. You see that? And of course, again, one of the major ways that Esau is going about doing that is going throughout the earth, all right, neither keeping at home and constantly waging war, all right, enlarging his desire as hell and death, as it just said, okay, destruction, captivity, all right. And so, going back to this information, it says right here, key developments. It says official statement. Alexei, all right, Zarafyov, okay, the deputy chairman of Russia's uh, parlia- parliament parliamentary defense committee, stated he sees no obstacles to supplying a friendly country like Venezuela with advanced weapons, specifically mentioning the new Orishnik hypersonic missile and Calibri cruise missiles. Okay, which if you've been keeping up in the news over this past week or so, Russia has been testing brand new missiles, cruise missiles, as well as you can look up the Poseidon missile, where it's pretty much an underwater nuclear missile, all right, that's in development right now by Russia, okay, where they can pretty much shoot nuclear ICBM missiles from pretty much underwater, submarine stations, okay. And again, this is ultimately the weaponry of Yahweh Shema Shai being opened up to Russia and these other heathen nations to help aid in the destruction of Babylon the Great America, okay. Destroy this place by way of nuclear fire, okay, and turn this place into a lake of fire. But it says, context, the threat follows reports that Venezuelan President Nicolai Maduro sent a letter to Russian President Vladimir Putin requesting military assistance, including new missile systems and upgrades for existing military hardware to counter potential U.S. military. Okay, and as well, we know ultimately, the main reason that Esau, Edom, all right, via America, Babylon the Great, is waging war against Venezuela is ultimately to control Venezuela's oil reserves. As pretty much when you look it up, Venezuela is one of the main countries, okay, if not the main country, if I'm not mistaken, down there in South America that holds the most oil reserves. Okay, so while Esau is using this whole pretext of waging war against Venezuela over drugs and stopping drugs from Venezuela from entering into the United States, okay, that's all just a farce, okay, to cover up the real reason why the United States is down there in Venezuela, or getting ready to put boots on the ground down there in Venezuela. It's all to control the oil reserves, okay, which even when you go into Esau's blessing in the book of Genesis 27, Genesis 27 and verse 38, it says, and Esau said unto his father, all right, Isaac, hast thou but one blessing, my father? Bless me, even me also, O my father. And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. Verse 39, and Isaac his father answered and said unto him, behold, thy dwelling shall be the fatness of the earth, and of the dew of heaven from above. Okay, so Esau was given a blessing to rule over the fatness of the earth. All right, just as Jacob was given a blessing to rule over the fatness of the earth, which is going to come, all right, when Yahushua establishes the kingdom of heaven, all right, the throne of David. Well, Esau was also given the blessing to rule over the fatness of the earth. Okay, and as we know, pursuant to 2nd Ezra 6 verse 9, Esau is the end of the world, and Jacob is the beginning of it that followeth. So Esau would be the first, okay, between Jacob and Esau to enter into his blessing, to rule over the fatness of the earth first, okay, before Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. All right, and of course, when we go into this word fatness, all right, because we know the fatness of the earth is, one aspect is referring to, the four corners of the earth, all right, the richest parts of the earth, okay, parts of the earth that are most fertile, that have, resources and things like that, okay. But overall, the fatness of the earth, one aspect of the fatness of the earth is ultimately talking about the whole entire earth, okay, the four corners of the earth, all right, and as well, this word, another aspect of this word fatness, okay, Strong's H 4924, mashaman, mashaman means what? Okay, fatness, fat piece, fertile place, richly prepared food, okay, and then it also goes into oil, all right, olive oil, all right, but oil, okay. So another aspect of Esau ruling over the fatness of the earth also goes into oil, okay. And again, when you look up Venezuela and their oil reserves, okay, Venezuela is, pretty much, amongst the top two or top three countries down there in South America, okay, if not number one, all right, in oil reserves. See that? So, having control over oil resources throughout the earth is a part of Esau's blessing. Esau with his oil, oil field companies and oil industries, constantly drilling oil out of the ground. All right. Why? Why is Esau so has such a hard on for controlling the oil and gas industry? Well, because that's a part of his blessing. All right. And of course, as we continue reading on, Genesis 27 and 39 again, and Isaac his father answered and said unto him, Behold, thy dwelling shall be the fatness of the earth, and of the dew of heaven from above. Verse 40, and by thy sword shalt thou live, and shalt serve thy brother, and it shall come to pass, when thou shalt have the dominion, that thou shalt break his yoke from off thy neck. All right, and that happened at the time of King Solomon. After Solomon's fall, you had certain Edomites, okay, who pretty much uprooted themselves from under the dominion of King Solomon, fled to Egypt and made certain alliances with certain enemy nations of Israel, during the days of King Solomon. All right, but as I said, Esau would ultimately rule over the fatness of the earth by way of what? The sword. Okay, constantly waging war, weaponry, all right, conquering, invading, colonization, all right. And of course, as well, we know Esau's sword also goes into his philosophies, his doctrines, his pharmakeia, all right, his false narratives within the news industry, all right, his false education, his false money system, all right. But at the forefront of Esau's sword is his actual physical weapons, okay, military power, all right, guns, tanks, missiles, his air force, all right. This is ultimately how Esau Edom has pretty much conquered the four corners of the earth by way of the sword, waging war, okay. And that's how he's able to go into these different countries throughout the earth and wage war, all right, overthrow governments, all right, all for the purpose of exploiting the people and controlling the resources of the lands that he conquers, okay. And Esau is looking to pretty much do that same thing down there in Venezuela. Okay, all under the guise of false narratives and false pretexts. Okay, all over waging war against drugs, but really when you look at Esau's the number one drug dealer throughout the four corners of the earth. Okay, through his pharmakeia, all right, through his wickedness. Okay, Esau's the number one drug dealer and the number one witch on the planet Earth. Okay, but as it's pretty much going into in this information, pretty much Russia is now floating around the idea of sending, all right, not only just missiles to Venezuela, but as we're going into hypersonic missiles down there to Venezuela. Okay, to pretty much aid Venezuela in countering against the United States military. All right, and against all the bombing and destroying of boats and ships being done by the U.S. military. Okay, says Russia and Venezuela. Read right here. All right, Russia and Venezuela recently formalized a strategic partnership treaty covering military, economic, and energy sectors. All right, because when you go into it at one time years ago, the United States and Venezuela had close ties, economic ties. Venezuela would agree to sell their oil to the United States in exchange for U.S. dollars. All right, but over these recent years, okay, especially if I'm not mistaken, going back to around 2020, 2021 ish. All right, pretty much Venezuela started to turn the cold shoulder against America. Okay, no longer started to accept U.S. dollars in exchange for selling their oil reserves to the United States. Okay, and ultimately started doing what? Venezuela started making particular deals with Russia. Okay, forming as it went into military alliances with Russia, economic ties with Russia, energy energy sector relationships with Russia, which oil and gas goes into the energy sector, right? It says Russia and Venezuela recently formalized a strategic partnership treaty covering military, economic, and energy sectors. Russian military transport planes have recently landed in Caracas, potentially delivering air defense systems like the Pantsir S-1 and Buk M2E. All right. Then it says right here, Maduro, the president of Venezuela, has boasted of deploying thousands of existing Russian anti-aircraft missiles in key defense positions. All right. Then it continues to say, U.S. actions. The U.S. has significantly increased its military presence in the Caribbean as part of anti-drug trafficking operations, which Venezuela views as a threat and fabricating war. You see that? And yes, that is a fabricated doctrine. All right, a false doctrine. Okay, a false pretext used by the United States to justify waging war against Venezuela and ultimately to regain control over Venezuela's oil reserves. Okay, in exchange for giving U.S. dollars to Venezuela, which none of these countries around the world no longer want to deal with the United States or the U.S. dollar. Okay, why you think a lot of these countries are now joining up with Russia and China and Iran? Okay, India, joining up with these BRICS nation countries. Okay, because they look at the BRICS nations as the number one the number one competing alliance against the West, against America, NATO, and the EU. Okay, and as the BRICS is getting more stronger throughout the earth and getting more influence throughout the earth. Okay, you're gonna see more and more of these smaller countries throughout the earth, such as Venezuela, for example. Okay, joining with Russia and China and Iran and the BRICS nations. Okay, all because pretty much the whole world is tired of the West. Especially against America, Babylon the Great. And even America's own allies are fed up with America. Okay, America's European allies, the NATO and EU countries, even they're fed up with the United States. Okay, as well as the small heads, which is why when we read in Revelation the 17th chapter, okay, where it talks about the beast shall hate the whore, okay, the whore being in America, Babylon the Great, okay, and the beast referring to NATO and the EU. All right, these NATO and EU countries are also going to, the Lord is going to put a spirit on these NATO and EU countries to join with America's enemies such as China, Russia, Iran, okay, North Korea, to help aid in the nuclear destruction of America during World War III. Okay, and then it says down here, geopolitical strategy. Experts suggest Russia's actions are a strategic play to divert U.S. attention from the conflict in Ukraine and project influence in the Western Hemisphere, though the actual extent of potential high-end military aid is constrained by the demands of the Ukraine war. Okay, but pretty much as we see, now Russia, okay, as relations between Russia and Venezuela has been getting more and more stronger throughout recent years. Okay, as the United States is waging war against Venezuela, okay, and ramping up its military presence in the Caribbean against Venezuela, now we see Russia is getting ready to get into the picture, okay, and come to Venezuela's aid. You see that? And all right, let's get Jeremiah 50. Jeremiah 50 and verse 41. Okay, going into the destruction and judgment against Babylon, which when you read in Jeremiah chapters 50 and 51, the Babylon that's prophesied in both of these chapters is talking about Babylon the Great, America, okay, the modern day Babylon. Because real quick, when you read right here up above in verse 40, Jeremiah chapter 50 verse 40, it says, as the Most High overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah and the neighbor cities thereof, saith the Lord Yahweh, so shall no man abide there, neither shall any son of man dwell therein. Now, when you go into the book of Genesis and you read about how the Most High destroyed ancient Sodom and Gomorrah, how did the Most High destroy Sodom and Gomorrah and the neighbor cities? By raining down fire and brimstone from the heavens. Okay, literally burning those cities down to the ground, to a crisp, to where, okay, if you go to these to the regions where these particular cities existed at, okay, Sodom and Gomorrah and the neighboring cities, okay, if you go to the particular region where those cities existed at, you pretty much can't find any remains of those cities. Okay, you won't be able to actually pinpoint where each city was back in ancient times, back in the book of Genesis. Okay, because that shows how horrible and terrible Yahweh Shah destroyed those cities, okay, for their wickedness. All right, primarily the alphabet lifestyle that was going on in those particular cities. All right, the alphabet lifestyle that had our forefather, all right, our righteous forefather Lot, who was of the sons of God, okay, vexed with their filthy conversation daily. You see that? And so when you go into the history of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, okay, during the time of Nebuchadnezzar, all the way to the time of Belshazzar in Daniel the 5th chapter, okay, did the Most High destroy the Neo-Babylonian Empire the same way that he destroyed ancient Sodom and Gomorrah, by raining down fire and brimstone from the heavens and burning that whole entire kingdom down to a crisp? Okay, no. The Most High didn't destroy the Neo-Babylonian Empire in that manner. Okay? So the fact that this chapter is speaking about how Yahweh Shah is going to destroy Babylon in Jeremiah 50 as well as 51, the same way he destroyed ancient Sodom and Gomorrah, this has to be talking about a future Babylon, which is ultimately what? Babylon the Great, which is what? The United States of America. The Lord is going to destroy this place, America, in the same fashion that he destroyed ancient Sodom and Gomorrah. by raining down fire and brimstone from the heavens. All right, but this time the fire and brimstone is going to come in the form of the ICBM nuclear missiles, as well as hypersonic missiles shot off from countries such as Russia, China, all right, Iran, India, Pakistan, okay, and various of these other nations that have nuclear capability, all right, and even from America's European allies and NATO and EU countries, they're going to aid in the destruction of this place, okay, all according to the will of Yahweh Shema Shai, all right, and so as it continues to read in verse 41, Jeremiah 50 verse 41, behold, a people shall come from the north, and a great nation. Okay, and of course, this great people from the north, this great nation is talking about Russia. Okay, as Russia dwells in the northern hemisphere of the earth. Okay, this is talking about Russia. All right, and it says, and many kings shall be raised up from the coast of the earth. You see that? And so, what does this show right here? That at the time when the Lord Yahweh Shema Shai will be raising up Russia, okay, Gog, Magog, as it speaks of in Ezekiel 38, right? At the time when the Lord will be raising up Russia, okay, to be a superpower in the earth again, a military superpower, right, through nuclear capability, ramping up his military, getting back into that Soviet Union warlike mindset, that anti-West, anti-American mindset. Simultaneously, it would also lead to, as it said, and many kings shall be raised up from the coast of the earth. Meaning what? As the Lord would raise up Russia in these outer days to be a military superpower to come up against America and against the West, it would also lead to, all right, a lot of these other smaller countries throughout the earth being raised up simultaneously with Russia, and as well joining and making particular allegiances with Russia, okay, all to come up against the West, against America primarily, as well as against the small heads, and this scripture right here, links well with as it speaks of in the book of Joel, the 3rd chapter, where it talks about the weak shall say that I am strong. Okay, these weaker, smaller nations such as, North Korea, Syria, Iran, okay, Venezuela, all right, Libya, Ethiopia, now, starting to puff up their chests against America and against the West, okay, and pretty much talking shit against America, okay, because what? They know that they're going to have, countries like Russia and China backing them up, okay, all to ultimately wage war against the West. See that? So as it says again, Jeremiah chapter 50 verse 41, behold, a people shall come from the north, and a great nation, and many kings shall be raised up from the coast of the earth. Verse 42, like Venezuela, for example, is one of these many kings. All right, but it says, verse 42, they shall hold the bow and the lance. They are cruel. Okay, and what would the bow and the lance in these outer days represents? Okay, missiles. All right, long range missiles, nuclear missiles, ICBM missiles. All right, hypersonic missiles, right? That's what the bow and the lance would represent, okay, in these outer days, right? It says, they shall hold the bow and the lance. They are cruel. And as we see, now Venezuela is getting ready to hold the bow and the lance, okay? Hypersonic missiles supplied by Russia, okay? The United States of America's top enemy, okay? Venezuela is getting ready to hold the bow and the lance supplied by Russia. It says, Jeremiah 15:42 again, they shall hold the bow and the lance. They are cruel, and will not shew mercy. Their voice shall roar like the sea. They shall ride upon horses, every one put in array like a man to the battle against thee, O daughter of Babylon. You see that? So here we see another sign, all right, in this chapter, showing you that it's not speaking about the ancient Neo-Babylonian Empire. No, this is talking about the daughter of Babylon, okay, which is what? Babylon the Great, America, okay, the Babylon that will be ruling in these end days, all right, So Russia, okay, this people from the north, the great nation that is speaking about in verse 41 in this chapter, all right, along with many kings, you know, China, Iran, North Korea, Venezuela, okay, Libya, Ethiopia, India, Pakistan, South Africa, all right, Russia, along with many kings, these smaller nations will be raised up in these outer days, okay, to hold the bow and the lance, all right, missiles, nuclear missiles, hypersonic missiles supplied by from Russia and China, okay, to ultimately go to battle and go to war against the daughter of Babylon, America, Babylon the Great, okay. And what we see right here, this bit of news that we see right here from Google, okay, Russia possibly sending hypersonic missiles to Venezuela, this is all going to be a part of it. Okay, this is all going to be a part of, okay, these nations throughout the earth gearing up to wage war against the daughter of Babylon, America. Okay, holding the bow and the lance. All right. Now let me get this. The book of Obadiah, Obadiah 1 verse 1, it says, the vision of Obadiah, thus saith the Lord power Yahweh concerning Edom. We have heard a rumor from the Lord Yahweh, and an ambassador is sent among the heathen. Okay, arise ye and let us rise up against her in battle. See that? And that's the spirit that's all throughout the earth in these latter days. Okay, these heathen nations, these other nations, rised up in battle against Esau, Edom, primarily here in America, Babylon the Great. It says, verse 2, behold, I have made thee small among the heathen. Thou art greatly despised. See that? Esau, Edom in these latter days via America, okay, as well as the small hats are being made small among the heathen and greatly despised. Because what? There's a shameful spewing upon Esau's glory. He's being cast down. Okay, all the wickedness of the west is being exposed in these outer days. All right, and as well, a testimony is going up to Yahweh Shai from the mouth of the prophets, us the hopeful elect of the nation of Israel. Okay, and Esau is being despised and exposed in these outer days. Okay, as a great inquisition against Esau, Edom, and the West. Okay, Babylon the Great, America, NATO and the EU, as well as a great inquisition upon the small hats. You see that? So that's why the Lord is raising up these heathen nations to rise up against battle against Esau, Edom, in the West, and against primarily America. It says, I'm going to jump down to verse 7, Obadiah 1 verse 7, all the men of thy confederacy have brought thee even to the border. The men that were at peace with thee have deceived thee and prevailed against thee. They that eat thy bread have laid a wound under thee. There is none understanding in him. All right. And let's read that in the NLT. Obadiah verse 7 in the NLT says, all your allies will turn against you. Okay. And at one time, Venezuela was likened to an ally with America. Okay. Selling their oil resources to America in exchange for US dollars. Well, now, as we see countries like Venezuela, along with Saudi Arabia as of recently as well, okay, these oil-rich countries, right, have been turning against America. Okay, and very soon, before you know it, the Lord's going to put a spirit on these NATO and EU countries to also turn against America as well and wage war against this place and join up with America's enemies, right, such as Russia and China, right? But as it says again, Obadiah verse 7 in the NLT, all your allies will turn against you. They will help to chase you from your land. They will promise you peace while plotting to deceive and destroy you. Okay? And hey, if a country like Venezuela is gearing up on hypersonic missiles from one of America's number one enemy throughout the earth, okay, then that can only mean what? That Venezuela is seeking to destroy this place, or at least aid in destroying this place. Okay, a hypersonic missile, or rather hypersonic missiles, as it says right here. A Russian official has threatened the possibility of sending hypersonic missiles to Venezuela. So not just one missile, all right, or not just one hypersonic missile, but okay, several hypersonic missiles Russia is looking to send to Venezuela. Okay, and that can only mean for one thing. Okay, to help aid in the destruction of this place, America. All right, ran by Esau Edom. Says again, Obadiah verse 7 in the NLT. All your allies will turn against you. They will help to chase you from your land. They will promise you peace while plotting to deceive and destroy you. Your trusted friends will set traps for you and you won't even know about it. See that? And this right here, this war in Venezuela is ultimately going to end up being a trap for against the United States and against the military. Okay, because if you have a country like Russia getting involved with this war in the sense of supplying Venezuela with all kinds of hypersonic missiles and missile defense system and anti-aircraft defense system. All right, then that can only mean this is all going to end up backfiring against the United States. Okay, and that's all according to the will of Yahweh Shemashai. Because hey, Babylon the Great is falling. Okay, this place is losing its dominance, is losing its influence throughout the earth. Okay, it's being cast down. All right, and it's all simply through this word going out, these prophecies going out by the mouth of the prophets of Yahweh Shemashai, starting with the apostles and the bishops and the elders of Great Millstone, down to the least of us that are of the hopeful elect. You see that? So this information that we're seeing right here, I just pretty much want to do a simple lesson going into this. Nothing too deep, but yeah, we see this whole tension between the United States and Venezuela starting to escalate more and more to the point where now Russia is getting involved. Okay, to protect their interests in Venezuela, as well as to protect their alliance with the government of Venezuela. Okay, to receive Venezuelan oil in exchange for the Russian currency in Venezuela. All right, and again, this is all going to end up backfiring against the United States. Okay, and of course, as any time the United States goes throughout the earth and does some type of wickedness, all right, ultimately, who ends up getting the short end of the stick due to the United States' wickedness? The American people, okay, the so-called middle class here in America, all right. But all in all, this is just another example of Babylon the Great, America being led into war, okay, and ultimately being led into judgment. All right. This more rumors and rumors of war, beginning of sorrows, okay, and pretty much the beginning of the end against America, Babylon the Great. You see that? And hey, was bad news to this place and this society, and it's ultimately good news to us, the hopeful elect. Okay, so I just pretty much want to go into this a little bit, so Lord willing, this video is edifying, and until next time, shalom.